Thank you very much, Albert. You see, I officiated at their wedding last night, 24 hours ago, and I said to them, and they said it wouldn't last. uh, anyway, I think it's wonderful that they're here, don't you? I don't think I would be. But anyway, that's dedication. That's real dedication. Anyway, I wanted to welcome all of you. So many of you I know, and so many of the churches that you're from. I'm supposed to talk about my my family. I don't ever talk about anything but my family. Someday I'm going to talk about Jim Freeman's family. And it's really uncomfortable to talk about my family with Jim there, because he wrote the book, you know. And when we do the programs together, why, we fuss a lot. And so I said to him, well, I'm going to ask you to ask me questions, because I think so many of you have heard, you read the book, and I hope you read the book. I mean, Jim will really feel badly if you didn't read the book. The history of unity, the story of the Fillmores. But I thought that maybe you would like to have something that you'd like to ask me, so that I just won't go off and bore you, because I could go on and on since I was born here. And I was born right here, and I probably have heard me say this before, but I was born right here at what was then Unity Farm. And I'm not going to tell you how long ago it was. But it was a while. Jim and I were talking about, when you say treasures, that sounds like, I never thought I'd live to be a treasure. That's old. In fact, I was doing this, think of something else. It's all right for Jim to be a treasure, because that's what I always say about Jim when we're together. Jim, you're a treasure. Oh, we've known each other for a long time, obviously. Where was I? Oh, I was born here down at Bob Barr's house, only it wasn't Bob Barr's house at that time. It was my father's house, and I was born right there. And my grandfather thought this was such a nice thing that I was born here, and it was called Unity Farm, so he wanted to call me Unity Farm Fillmore. And that is the truth. And the rest of the family, I think, thought that they couldn't live with this, you know. And so my brother was a little bit older than I was, old enough to know that he didn't want to be related to anybody called Unity Farm. So he cried, and I was saved from that. But I really did have just a wonderful, wonderful childhood. And I just came here from a Father's Day picnic, and I was thinking that it was myself, which is the granddaughter, and then there were the great-grandchildren and the great-great-grandchildren. So we go on, and I thought how wonderful it would have been if my father and my grandfather could see their great-great-grandchildren. But as I say, I grew up here, and it was a wonderful, wonderful place to grow up. You know, I really did have a magical childhood, and I didn't even know the difference. You know, I thought everybody had childhoods like this, and when you see all of the things that are in our world today, of all of the dysfunctional families and all of the unhappiness and the child abuse, and I just had such a beautiful time. And there was three of us. My brother, Charles, and my cousin, Fran. And Fran was Royal Fillmore's daughter, and she was raised by Lowell Fillmore. Were the three sons. Lowell was the oldest, and then Rick is my father, who was the architect of this village. And I was thinking about my dad today, because I was really Daddy's girl. My mother died when I was 13. And she was ill for a number of years. So I spent a great deal of time with my father. And I'd drive all over what was the farm. And it really was a farm. And Jim will testify to this. We had apple orchards. And we had, when I was a kid, they had chickens. Were you around when they had chickens? And the chickens used to peck themselves, so they decided that this was for eggs. And so they put little glasses, little colored glasses on the chickens so that they wouldn't peck themselves. That's the truth. You went over there and here were all these little chickens with colored glasses on. They had a lot of unusual things here when I grew up. And a lot of unusual people, I'll tell you. One thing that was interesting to a lot of people, my friends, was my grandfather always went into the silence. And he did it in a way that I've never seen anybody that prayed or he called it the silence and meditated. And so wherever he was, if things weren't, the conversation got away from him or people were doing any other things, he'd just always go into the silence. Well, I thought everybody's grandfather did this. So I'd have my little friends out from Lee Summit, and my grandfather, and he just, I don't know, he'd shut his eyes and he'd sort of withdraw and he'd kind of turn his head like that. And they'd look at him, they'd say, what's the matter with your grandfather? And I'd say, well, he's in the silence. Oh, they'd say. Of course. And they thought we were rather strange. Can't imagine why. First place, Lee Summit was just a very little town. I'd rather I could go on. Are you sure? Or would you like to hear about the time I almost drowned Jim Freeman in the... Well, I lived at the swimming pool, and Jim, I don't know how old you were, but you were older than I was. Anyway, he worked in Silent Unity, and they'd all come out here. We had the vacation cottages over by the picnic grounds, and they'd come over and they'd come out and swim, and spend a lot of time at the swimming pool. And I was just a kid, and I guess I wasn't a very nice kid. But for something about Jim, that every time I'd see him in the water, I think he must have done something to irritate me. But we'd always get in this,
Very hard not to do something to irritate Rosemary.
See what I mean? It'd be better if he was up here because you'd really see the real Jim and the real Rosemary. Oh, anyway, so I'd always try to drown him, but then he tried to drown me too. So anyway, wouldn't that have been a sad thing if I'd done it? There wouldn't be a treasure here. All that poetry that wouldn't have gotten written. All those empty pages in Daily Word. Oh, dear. Well, where was I? Lee Summit. Oh, Lee Summit was a little town. And so they thought we were all vegetarians out here. Well, I wasn't a vegetarian. My dad wasn't a vegetarian. My uncle was a vegetarian, and my grandfather and grandmother, of course, were vegetarians. But the most devout vegetarian was my Uncle Lowell. And Jim and I have had some disagreement on this, the few things we ever disagree on my grandfather's vegetarianism, because you said that what did you say?
Rosemary, if you don't know what I'm saying.
You said he didn't eat fish. That's what you said. Yeah, but he did, because he'd come to our house every Saturday night. As long as I can remember, he would come to our house, and he and my dad would visit long into the night. And he loved Finn and Hattie, and I remember that he did eat that. But that's the only thing, and he didn't eat that. But that's the only thing that I think I can remember that he ate that wasn't, that was fish, that I can remember. Anyway, what was the point? Oh, so everybody in Lee Summit thought we were vegetarians. So when I'd go to their houses, they'd fix me vegetarian meals. And my cousin was raised as a vegetarian, and we ate meat. And so in these vegetarian magazines, they'd put my cousin and my brother were the same age, and they'd put pictures of this one eats meat, and this one doesn't. And I look at those pictures and I try to figure out what the difference was, but I never did. But that was one of the wonderful things about the Fillmore family, or my grandfather. He never was judgmental. He never tried to impose his views on you, you know, and he was a wonderful grandfather. You just couldn't have had a better grandfather. He'd do anything you wanted him to. He had such joy in living, and they had a little picture show up in Lee Summit, and he'd love to go to the movies, and that it'd change every few days, and he particularly liked Westerns, so you always knew that if you wanted to go to the movies, you could get my granddad to go with you. In fact, I was talking to my brother the other day because I was going to speak about Myrtle down at the conference, and I don't remember Myrtle very well. I really don't remember her because I was quite young when she passed away. Now, Jim remembers her because he worked in Silent Unity with him. She discovered him, and we were having a conversation about that the other night with the Pearsons out, because Dorothy Pearson was a great friend of my grandfather's too. But I was talking to my dad, and I said, do you remember, to my brother, I said, can you remember any stories I might tell about Myrtle? Because all I remember is this lovely lady in my mind's eye that had a crown of white hair, and she always had wore to my, what I remember was these flowing pastel colors, and she would bring us books to read, and I still have some of the fairy tales and the classic books that she had. And anyway, Charles said, well, yeah, I can remember. He said, this surprised me. He said, she was always teaching us things, telling us, you know, about how we should act and about things that we should do. And he said, and Papa Charlie, on the other hand, would be egging us on, you know, to go ahead and do it. And he would give us money. I remember that because we could always knew that if we needed something, and I'm running out of time, I can tell. I don't. But the thing about Charles Fillmore, I've quit, I will, is that he taught me, I think, I never thought of him as a metaphysician or a prophet, or I just thought of him as a grandfather. And he used to, there was a training school that was over here in the Charles Fillmore Chapel in the old Silent Unity building, and I'd go and sit there and listen to his lectures when I was a kid, and not to listen, but to go out and get a soda afterwards. And they used to have a wedding place where they had dinners, where they'd have fried chicken dinners, receptions, you know, wedding receptions. And he knew how much I liked fried chicken. And of course, he was a vegetarian, so he'd call me up and he said, well, I'm going to do a wedding, and they're going to have the reception down the road here to this place. He said, you come along and you can eat my chicken. And so I'd run up here where they get married over here, and I'd run and I'd just get in the car with him, and he'd take me along, and I don't think that he ever explained me. It was just some little kid that the minister picked up that ate the chicken, you know. But this is the way he was, you know, everything, and he loved music. He loved to my dad was kind of conservative, and we'd take people down to, then it was the Union Station, the railroad station. And I remember one night there was a dance hall called the Playmore in Kansas City where they had all the big bands, you know. And so we'd taken somebody to the plane, or to the train, and we're driving back, and the lights were on, and the music was coming out from the dance floor, and my dad had to stop for a stoplight or something there, and my granddad said, well, why don't we go in there, Rick, and just see what's happening? And my father looked at him, and I said, we're not going to go in there. Don't you know that it's late and we've got to go home? And he said, oh, come on, let's just go in and see. But that's the way he was. Life was always a great adventure for him. He was always, the unknown was always exciting to him. And he lived in California the last years of his life in the wintertime, and I was going to school out there. And I'd see him on weekends, but he had this, he seemed to have transcended the things that bother most of us. And he just lived in the moment, and he had this great enthusiasm for living, even when he was up in his early 90s. And this was the thing that I remember most about him, was this complete non-judgmental attitude, never trying to teach you something. Or when I used to get sick, they never called a doctor. They'd always call my granddad. And he'd come and sit by my bed and go into the silence. But there was never any, you never felt any judgment at all. You just felt this real love coming from him. And I wanted to sit next to him because he had this aura about him. He looked like a little kid. He always wore flowing ties, and he loved to put cologne all over himself, and he scrubbed like a kid that was getting ready to go to the circus. And that's what life was to him. It was just, as I said, just an exciting, glorious adventure. And I was so blessed to have grown up here at Unity Farm, and my father was a deep blessing to me. It's also my uncle. I can't say enough about him, and I thank you for listening about my family.